السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, last lesson in lesson 4 we began going over the letter Ra. Okay, we began going over the letter Ra and we learned how this letter Ra, it had a quality known as takrir. The quality known as takrir, which means that when you read this letter Ra, it produces a shiver on the tongue. But you don't want to make the shiver so much that it becomes Ra. And you don't want to make it so less that it's Ra. It's Ra. Okay, just a very light shiver. Okay, and the way to do it is you got to imagine curling your tongue. Okay, the tip of the tongue needs to be curled up and it needs to be touching the back of the front teeth. So Ra, Ra, okay. And it needs to, that shiver, only very less, not too much. So that's the quality of Ra. And then we asked ourselves, is Ra full mouth or empty mouth? Okay? And we learned that in some cases it's full mouth, and in some cases it's empty mouth. It all depends on what sign the Ra has. And we went over the first 3 cases last lesson. We went over Ra mutaharrik. Can anyone remember what does Ra mutaharrik mean? That Ra with a Dhamma, Kasra, Fatha. Yes, Dhamma, Fatha or Kasra. So really quickly, if a Ra has a Fatha or a Dhamma, is it full mouth or empty mouth? Full mouth. So we're going to say Ra and Ru. You understand? Nice and heavy. Ra, Ru. Okay. And if Ra has a Kasra, it's going to be empty mouth. Ri. Everyone say with me? Ri. So we want to make sure we don't say Ri. We don't want to read it full mouth. We want to read it nice and easy, nice and empty. Ri. Ri. Okay. So that was the first case. Ra mutaharrik. Very simple, very easy. And then the second case was Ra mushaddad. Ra mushaddad, when Ra has a shadda, also known as tashdeed. And normally what the rule of shadda is, if you can't remember, what shadda does to a letter, it makes that letter double. So for example, when I say the word Rabba, that ba has a shadda. Because how many shaddas am I reading? How many bas am I reading? Rabba. I'm reading 2. Rabba. And even if you were to write it out separately, just imagine this, okay? You got Rabba. So if the Ra with a Fatha or a Zabar, Ba with a Sukoon, and then the second Ba with a Zabar. So Rabba. But what the shadda does, it brings the 2 bars together, and instead of writing sukoon on one and fatha on the other, you just bring them 2 together and you write a shadda and a fatha. So that's what shadda does. It's just the doubling of the letter. And if you remember correctly, the rule of shadda, the rule of tashdeed is the same as mutaharrik. So you just look at the sign above. Okay, if the sign above the shadda is fatha or a dhamma, then the ra is also going to be full mouth. And if the sign on top of the shadda is a kasra, then the ra is going to be empty mouth. Very simple. And then we came to ra sakin. That ra with a sakin. This is when it got a bit complicated. Okay, this is when it got a bit complicated. Now ra with a sakin, what you do? You look at the letter before. You look at the letter before. You look at the sign. You don't actually look at the letter, but you look at the sign on the letter before. That's what you need to do. Look at the sign on the letter before. So if the sign on the letter before is a fatha or a dhamma, then the ra will be full mouth. And if it's a kasra, if the sign on the letter before is a kasra, then the ra will be empty mouth with how many conditions? 3 conditions. We need to remember there's 3 conditions. Okay? Very important you remember these 3 conditions. That for ra sakin to be empty mouth before kasra, that scenario, that case needs to fulfill 3 conditions. I'll say the first one. The first condition was that the kasra and the ra sakin are in one word. They're in one word. If for example the kasra is in the word before, and the ra sakin is at the start of the next word, is that ra sakin going to be full mouth or empty mouth? That's going to be full mouth. We need to remember that for ra sakin to be empty before a kasra, it needs to meet, it needs to fulfill three conditions. It has to fulfill three conditions. The first one, the kasra and the ra sakin in one word. Kasra, sakin, one word. If they're in separate words, if the kasra is in the end of this word and the ra sakin is in the start of this word, then is this ra going to be empty or is it going to be full? It's going to be full mouth because it's not fulfilling the condition. Do you understand? It's going on wrong. It needs to fit nicely. So the kasra and the ra sakin in one word. That's the first condition. The second condition, the kasra that is before the ra sakin should be permanent. The kasra before the ra sakin should be permanent. And if it's not permanent, if it's temporary, and if you remember, what would a temporary kasra normally come on? Which letter? Can you remember? Alif. So when you look at the example of wal fajr towards the end, irji'i, the alif has a temporary kasra, because if you join it to the ayah before, the alif goes away. Do you understand? So the kasra will go away. But because we are going to read the alif, we're going to give it a temporary kasra. But here there's a temporary kasra before the ra sakin. So is that ra going to be full or empty? It's going to be full, because the kasra is not permanent. So the second condition we need to remember, the kasra needs to be a permanent kasra. It needs to be a kasra that is there all the time. Okay, well, however we read it, if we join it to the ayah before, the kasra needs to be there all the time. So the first condition was kasra and the ra sakin in one word. But that kasra also needs to be permanent. The kasra also needs to be permanent. And the third condition is the letter after shouldn't be a full mouth letter. It shouldn't be a heavy letter. If it's a heavy letter after the ra sakin, then what? Ra is going to be full mouth. Let's just look at an example of each. Okay, so for example, I mentioned the example of irji'i. There's a kasra on the alif, but that kasra is permanent or temporary? Temporary. So that means the ra is going to be full. So we're not going to say we're going to say ir. Can you see? This is going against the rule. This is going against the rule because the kasra is temporary. Another example, amir, tabu, amir. Ami is the word before with the kasra on the mim, ami, and then ir. The next word, which is irtabu, the ra has a sukoon. So when we say it, amir, when we're joining it, it's going to be amir, but then we need to look. Ami is the word before and irtabu is the word after. Kasra is in the word before and the ra sakin is in the word after. So then that means here as well, the ra sakin is also going to be full mouth because it's not in the same word. And the last example, qirtas. Okay, here we have ra sakin. We have a kasra before it. This kasra is in the same word, yes. It's together with the ra sakin, yes. And it's a permanent kasra, yes. So it should be empty. But now let's look at the letter after. If you look at the letter after, qirtas, it's a ta. So look, see, we haven't met all three conditions. Here the last condition is there shouldn't be a full mouth letter. Here qirtas, there's a full mouth letter ta. So that means here as well the ra sakin will be full mouth. Okay, so these were the three conditions for a ra sakin to be empty if it comes before a kasra. And an example is washawirhum. This was all on the sheet last week. Okay, washawirhum. Here we have waw with a kasra, wirhum. The waw kasra is, it's in the same word, isn't it? Wirhum, it's in the same word. So it's permanent kasra, it's in the same word, and is there a full mouth letter after it? Wirhum. Is ha a full mouth letter? No. So we've met all three conditions. So in this case, the ra sakin is going to be empty mouth. It's going to be nice and easy and smiley. Washawirhum. So that was the third case. Okay, this was the third case. For how to read the ra, whether full or empty. And the fourth case we have beginning in lesson 5, which is on your sheet, is ra mawqufa. Okay, ra mawqufa. Now, ra mawqufa is very similar to ra sakin. The difference between ra sakin and ra mawqufa, Okay, mawqufa comes from the word waqf. And who can remember what does waqf mean? Stop. Okay, waqf means stop. So ra mawqufa, what it means, it's that ra that you're stopping on. That ra that you're stopping on. Okay, and generally when you're stopping on a ra mawqufa, you stop on it with a sukoon. You stop on it with a sukoon. You understand? You'll understand from the example. Okay, so what is the rule of ra mawqufa? And what you need to remember as well, in ra sakin, if you remember in ra sakin, you look at the letter before, don't you? You look at the letter before. But in ra mawqufa, the example of ra mawqufa is that the letter before is also sakin. The letter before is also sakin. So what do you do in that case? It says that when there is a sakin before a ra mawqufa, when there is a sakin before a ra mawqufa, and like I said, ra mawqufa, which that ra which will be a sakin because you're stopping on it, then what will you do? Then you will just look at the letter before that. You just go again one step back. You go one step back. And for example, let's see, if the mutaharrik before is a fatha or a dhamma, then what do you think the ra mawqufa will be? It's going to be full. These, if you realize, these rules follow a very simple pattern. If it's anything to do with fatha dhamma, then it's going to be what? Full. And if it's anything to do with kasra, generally it's going to be empty. Okay? So here, if there's a fatha or a dhamma before the sakin, then it's going to be full. And if it's a kasra before the sakin, then it's going to be empty math. And you'll understand from the example. If you look at the first example, you can see on your papers, it should be on your papers, and you can see on the board. The first example in A is wal fajr. Wal fajr. You understand? Here, this ra, before we say full, let's look at this ra, okay? If I was to carry on with the next ayah, I would read it like this. Wal fajri wa layalin. Did you hear how I read it? Wal fajri wa layalin. I didn't stop, did I? I'm reading the first ayah and the second ayah together because you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that in the Quran. You're allowed to read the ayahs together if you want to. So when I read wal fajri wa layalin, how is this ra? Is this ra full or empty? Empty. Why? Because this ra has a kasra, isn't it? Simple. This ra has a kasra, so the ra is going to be empty. Again, I'm going to listen very carefully. Wal fajri wa layalin. Now, if I decide to stop, and if I just want to say wal fajr, this ra has now become what? It's become a ra. No, but what kind of ra is it known as? It's become a ra mawqufa. Because I'm stopping on it. I want to stop. Wal fajr. Do you understand? Wal fajr. I'm stopping now. I want to stop. I don't want to carry on anymore. And we established if you carry on, the ra is empty mouth because the ra is a kasra. But if we stop now, what do we do? What do we do? First step, let's look at the letter before. What's the letter before, uncle? Jim. And what does the jim have? It's got sukoon, isn't it? Wal fajr. The jim has a sukoon as well. So now what do? We look at the letter before. So we just going to go back another step. We're going to look at the letter before. You just need to look at the closest sign before. Do you understand? Look for the closest sign before. So here, what's the letter with the closest sign, uncle? Fa with a fatha. So now we know the fa has a fatha. How are we going to read the ra? Full or empty? Full mouth. So when we would carry on, it would be empty. Wal fajri. But now we want to stop. It's going to become full. Wal fajr. Everyone read it after me, okay? Wal fajr. Again, and I really want you to remember this waw at the beginning, waw fatha. Is it going to be empty or is it going to be full? Is waw a full mouth letter or an empty mouth letter? Remember, if you remember, there are only 7 full mouth letters. Khussa daghtin qid. Kha, sad, dad, ta, dha, ghain, qaf. Waw isn't in these 7 letters, is it? Waw is a smiley letter. It's an empty mouth letter. So when we read, we don't want to say wal. We want to say well. Really open your mouth. Wal fajr. Fajr. The ra, listen to the heaviness. Wal fajr. So I want everyone to try it after me. Wal fajr. Again. Wal fajr. The trick to making a letter full, don't smile when you say it. If you smile, then you're making it empty. You need to really narrow your mouth. So, wal fajr. You understand? So this ra mawqufa is full because the letter before, which is sakin. So we're going to look at the letter before, which is fatha. Okay. Then other example, la fi khus. Okay. Now if I was to carry on, this is la fi khusrin. La fi khusrin. The ra has double kasra. So the ra should be what technically? It should be empty. La fi khusrin. The ra should be empty mouth. But now we are stopping on it. We're going to stop, yes? So the ra has now become mawqufa. This ra has now become mawqufa. Now that we're stopping on it, what do? We look at the letter before. Generally, before ra mawqufa, the letter before will also be sakin. Always, okay? Generally, if not always, generally the letter before ra mawqufa will also be sakin. It will also be sakin. So here look, khusrin, we have khus, we're going to stop on the ra, and before we stop on the ra, we need to find out, are we going to read the ra full mouth, or are we going to read the ra empty mouth? We look at the letter before, it's seen. The seen has a sukun, so we're going to look at the letter before. What's the letter before? Kha, which has a dhamma, or a pesh. So how are we going to read this ra? Full mouth. So la fi khusr. Everyone read it after me. La fi khusr. Again, la fi khusr. Okay, so this rule was very simple, yes? All you do, look at the letter before, the letter before the sakin, and if it's a fatha or a dhamma, it's full mouth, and if it's empty, so in this example that we have, lidhi hijr, okay? So lidhi hijr. Now this ra, we're going to stop on it, yes? Let's look at the letter before. The letter before is a jim, and this jim has a what? Sukun. So that means we're going to look at the letter before it. What is the letter before it? Ha. Okay, remember, not ha, ha. This is a smiley letter, empty mouth letter. Really practice your empty mouth letters. Ha. Okay? Ha. This has a what? Fatha, dhamma, or kasra? Kasra. I really want you to, even when you say this word, kasra, don't say kasra. Because if you're saying kasra, you're reading the kaf, everything and from now on, whenever you read Arabic, try to read everything, whether it's an empty mouth letter, read the empty mouth, because this will help. Do you understand? Because we need to get rid of these habits. Do you understand? So for example, kasra, don't say kasra anymore. If you're saying kasra, then you're reading kaf as a full mouth letter. So you want to say kasra, okay? So this ha has a kasra, so how is the ra going to be? Empty mouth. And there's no conditions here, okay? No conditions. This is very simple. So read after me. Lidhi hijr. Yeah, very simple. The difference is in the first two examples, wal fajr and lafi khusr. If you notice my ra, I'm reading it without smiling. Wal fajr lafi khusr. But when I read this one, lidhi hijr, my mouth stays in the smiling position. This is the trick that you need to you master. Keep your mouth in the smiling position. Lidhi hijr. Okay, so the ra mawqufa, very simple. Ra mawqufa, very simple. What you do, look at the letter before, which is generally sakin. So that means then you look at the letter before that. Now this is a very simple rule, but there's one tiny exception. One tiny exception. And what is that exception? Whenever you have a ya sakin, remember I mentioned the letter before ra mawqufa will always be what? It will always be sakin. Understand? The letter before ra mawqufa will always be sakin. Whether it's a ba sakin, whether it's a sin sakin, whether it's a jim sakin. But there's one exception. If there's a ya sakin, if there is a ya sakin before a ra mawqufa, what do? There's no need to look at the letter before anymore. No need. All this time we were looking at the letter before, weren't we? But when there's a ya sakin, Stop right there. You don't need to look at the letter before anymore. As soon as you see there's a ya sakin, straight away that ra will be empty mouth. Whether there's a fatha before the ya sakin, whether there's a dhamma, but there never will be a dhamma, whether there's a fatha before the ya sakin, or whether there's a fatha before the ya sakin or a kasra before the ya sakin, in both cases the ra will be empty mouth. And very simple rule, so a very simple example is look at this word khair. Okay, khair. First of all, we have a ra mawqufa. We're stopping, aren't we? Khair, ra mawqufa. What's the letter before? Ya with a sukoon. So technically, according to this rule, what would you look at now? You would normally look at the letter before, yes? And the letter before is kha. And the kha has a what? Fatha. So according to the rule, the ra should be what? Full mouth. But remember, this is the only exception. As soon as we see ya sakin, the ra is straight away empty. The reason why, because ya sakin, it automatically takes your mouth to a smiling position. Khay, can you see? Forget about the ra for now. If you just read kha, fatha and ya sakin, khay, can you see? Khay is taking my mouth to that smiling position. Can you see? So because of that, the ra will also be smiley. Khair. Everyone say after me. Khair. Again, remember the kha needs to be full though. So khair. Good. And the next example, Nadir, we have ra mawqufa. We're stopping on it. The letter before is what? Ya sakin. And even though the letter before is a kasra, we don't need to look at it. Straight away you tell yourself that ra mawqufa will be empty mouth. So these were the 4 rules of ra. Ra mutaharrik, ra mushaddad, ra sakin, and ra mawqufa. And what I wanted to do as well, I've got all the examples on your papers. These are examples taken from the Quran. We're going to try our best to go through them. On the boards, you can see I've highlighted the ras in red, so they stand out more. So if we look at the first example, if you're not feeling confident, or if you want to give it a try, inshallah, I want to go around the room and ask you to read it out. If you can't see it, let me know. That's okay, inshallah. Agha, can you see the one right at the top on the right hand side? It begins with la ta'kulu. The ra has a kasra. Try it again. Ra kasra. Riba. So la ta'kulu riba. Try it one more time. Good. And what you need to is even on your papers as well. It's on your papers as well. What you need to remember, you know this wow in la ta'kulu. Here, we haven't covered a lot of these rules, but it's good to go through them now as well. So la ta'kulu, okay, that wow sakin, this wow we are not going to stretch. Do you understand? This wow we are not going to stretch, because the rule here is when the next word begins with a sukoon or a shadda, then the letter before, if there's nothing on it, you're going to skip it. So we're not going to say la ta'kulu, we're going to go straight to the ra shadda, la ta'kulur. So la ta'kulu, try one more time, Agha. Try one more time, la ta'kulu. La ta'kulu riba. Riba. Now tell me, is this ra empty or full? Full. You sure? What does the ra have on it? Empty. It's kasra, isn't it? It's a shadda. It's shadda and it's kasra, so it's going to be empty. So la ta'kulu riba. Riba, nice and easy. Janab, try the next one, the magh. Oh. Good, alhamdulillah, very good, mashallah. And so this ra, first of all, which ra is this? Meaning, is this ra mutaharrik, ra mawqufa? So, and what's this ra going to be? Full or empty? Exactly, mashallah. Uwais, try the next one underneath la ta'kulu riba. Starts with maghfir. One more time. So the first ra you read very good, but the second ra it sounded like an English ah. Remember, you need to bring this quality of takrir. Mir. Don't say mir. Mir. Rabbihim. Good, mashallah. There's 2 ras there, yeah? Can you tell me what's the first ra in maghfirah? Is that full or empty? Full mouth, exactly. And what about in min rabbihim? It's also full mouth. Also full mouth. Very easy because you have the ra with the fatha. Uncle Sabri Sab, do you want to try the next one? Or I can read the beginning part. وَمَأْوَاهُ جَهَنَّمْ وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. Try me the masir. So is this ra full or empty? Empty mouth. Yeah. So read it. Can you read it from here? وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. One thing I want to point out. You know the hamza that you have. Hamza has a sukoon. Yes. Can you see the hamza has a sukoon? And when hamza has a sukoon, it makes a hiccup sound. So the sound you're going to make is wa bi. Okay, wa bi sal. So wa bi sal. Try one more time, Sabri Sab. Try one more time. Wa bi sal. You're saying bisal. Say bi sal. Excellent. Exactly. Try one more time. Yeah. So that's the sound of the hamza sukoon. And what's the last word? Wa bi sal. Say from masir. Masir. Yes. I just want everyone to here get confident in the reading, inshallah. The more we practice, the more better we'll get, inshallah. Yeah, even in ma'wa. Yes, exactly. In that you have a hamza sukoon there, so that's also going to be the hiccup sound. Or ma'wa. If you didn't know this, when hamza has a sukoon, it makes a hiccup sound. So ma'wa bi'sal. Do you understand? Okay. Uncle Akram, do you want to try the next one? Walam you. Ala, exactly. So this ra, is this full or empty? It's full, exactly. Yeah, mashallah. Adam, do you want to try the next one? Wama indal khair. Is this ra full or empty? Empty because ya sakin. Straight away, as soon as you say ya sakin, it's going to be empty. Aghasab, the next one. Kitaban fi. You know, Aghasab, you know your the kasra on the qaf. Try and make it qir. Qir. No, that's okay. Kitaban fi. Falamasu. Okay, so the main part is the qir tas. Yes, so this ra full or empty? Full. Full, yes, because here what's making it full here? What's making the ra sakin full here? The ta, yes, the ta. The ta, not the qaf. Okay, the letter before is a kasra. So technically the kasra should be making the ra empty. But because of the ta, it's becoming full. Janab, the next one. Ahadahumul mautu. So Rabbir. Okay, now first in the word Rabbi, what's the ra? Full or empty? First ra is full mouth and the second ra? Second is empty. If you remember the three exceptions, it needs to be a permanent kasra. Is this kasra permanent? Rabbi and the ba kasra. Is that a permanent kasra? Yes, you're right. It's permanent. Is it in the same word? It's not in the same word. So that means this ra, is it full or empty? No, full. Full mouth. You need to remember, this is the tricky one. This is the tricky one that we all need to get our heads around, okay? That for the ra sakin to be empty, when there's a kasra before it, is the three things. It needs to be a permanent kasra, it needs to be in the same word, and there shouldn't be a heavy letter after it. In this case, there's no heavy letter. It's a permanent kasra, but is it in the same word or different words? Different words. So it hasn't met this condition. So this ra sakin is going to be full mouth. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what classifies as permanent?
So we actually discussed this in the last lesson. What is permanent is that kasra which will never be changed, okay, due to you joining it to the ayah before. So for example, we spoke about in Surah Al-Fajr, in the last ayat, there's a part, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna turji'i. Okay, the ayah, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, that's one ayah, and then irji is the next ayah. But when I'm joining it together, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, listen to this part, inna turji'i. Turji'i. I've joined the first ayah to this, the second ayah. Now when I read it separately, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna irji'i. I've given the alif a kasra, but is that kasra permanent or is it temporary? Temporary, because I've read it only because I've stopped. You understand? If I decide to join with the ayah before, what will happen to the kasra? It's going to be out the window. Do you understand? That's what that's what it is. It means about permanent and temporary.
Only happen at the end of the ayah.
Meaning this temporary kasra usually only comes on an alif, okay, which will normally be at the start of an ayah. So irji'i, which is at the start of the ayah. So that's what I mean by temporary. And in this case, the kasra and the ra sakin, they're not in the same word. Rabbi is the word before, and irji'un is the word after. So here this ra will also be full mouth. So rabbir ji'un. We're not going to say rabbir ji'un. Okay. There's quite a few examples. I want to try and go through these a bit quickly. So I'll just go through some as well. So in the next one we have min tahtihal anhar. So this ra sakin. What do we have before it? This is something new actually. We have what do we have before it? A khara zabar. So we have a khara zabar, and khara zabar is basically technically the same as, it has the same outcome, same impact as a zabar. So this ra is going to be full or empty? Full. Exactly. So min tahtihal anhar. Can you hear the heaviness? Okay. The next one, walayalin. Sabri sab, can you try this one? Walayalin ashr, yeah? Sheen, ashr. So this ra, we're going to stop, yes? It's a mawqoofa, isn't it? We're going to stop here. When we listen to Surah Al-Fajr in namaz, wal fajr wa layalin ashr. Do you understand? We stop on it. We don't say ashirin, we say ashr. So Sabir Sahib, is this ra full or empty? Empty mouth. What made you think it's empty mouth? Let's look at let's go through it. So it's mawqoofa, ra mawqoofa. So what do we look at now? We're going to look at the letter before, aren't we, uncle? The letter before is a sheen. What does the sheen have? Sukoon. So that means what we're going to look at now, uncle? We're going to look at the letter before. What does the letter before have? It's an ayn with a zabar. Ashar is an ayn with a zabar, ayn with a fatha. So now, Sabri Sahib, tell me, ayn with a fatha. Fatha, remember fatha. So now, what is this ra going to be? Full or empty? Full mouth, okay? So remember, when it's a fatha, it's going to be full. Ashar. Did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. Why do you have to stop there? Why can't you say rin? Or
If you want to carry on, join it with the next ayah, you're more than able to, just because there's an ayah sign there, so we should stop. And when we do stop, that's when the rules of stopping come. That's something we haven't covered that yet, but that's when the rules of stopping come. How do you stop on a fatha? How do you stop on a kasra? How do you stop on a dhamma? How do you stop on two fatha? How do you stop on double fatha? How do you stop on double kasra? So in this case, double kasra, the way you stop on it, you make double kasra into a sukoon. So that's why we're going to read the ra with a sukoon. Do you understand? So, and this ra mawqoofa, you look at the letter before. Sheen is a sukoon, so you look at the letter before. Ayn is a fatha, so the ra is going to be full mouth. So walayalin ashr. Next one, Uncle Akram, if you can try it. Washaf'i wal watr. Remember the ta, this is a very common mistake as well. Ta is a sukoon. So we don't want to say watar. If we say watar, what's the mistake there? What have we given the ta? We're given the ta zabar, isn't it? So we don't want to say watar. If you listen very carefully, you want to say watar. Do you understand? Watar. Make sure the ta has a sukoon and you just make the sound of the ra. Watar. Okay? So Uncle Akram, this ra, is it going to be full or empty? Full mouth, because the waw before has a fath. Exactly. The next example we have was, I'm just going to read this one. So wasayajzillahu. And I just want to mention as well, here we have Allah's name, yes? Wasayajzillahu. We have Allah's name, don't we? And we've covered the rules of Allah. So who can tell me, here Allah, is it going to be full or empty? Empty, because there's a kasra before, isn't there? So wasayajzillahu shakirin. This ra, is it full or empty? Empty. The next one, irji'i. Look, this I even read the ayah here. I read the alif without a kasra, because in the Saudi Arabian Qurans, this alif doesn't have a kasra. Okay, because that's how they're written. That's how they're written. The alif alifs will never be written with a temporary kasra in the Saudi Arabian Qurans. So we should know that this alif is going to have a kasra. How do we know? We look at the closest letter with a sign. The closest letter with the sign is Jim, yes? Jim has a kasra, so the alif we are going to give kasra. Okay, if the Jim had a fatha, we'll also give the alif a kasra. If the Jim had a dhamma, then we'll give the alif a dhamma. Do you understand? So that's another rule that, you know, what do you call it? That's part of the Quran when it comes to ayat beginning with the verbs. Okay? For example, in Surah Yasin, there's one ayah which begins with ittabi'u. Okay? If you're familiar with Surah Yasin, there's an ayah begins with ittabi'u. But in the Saudi Arabian Qurans, the alif doesn't have a kasra because this is a verb. So how do we know to give the alif a kasra? The closest letter ta has a ta. Itta. It has a fatha. So the rule is when the closest sign is a fatha or a kasra, then you give the alif a kasra. And if the closest sign is a dhamma, then you give the alif a dhamma. Okay? So in this case, irji'i. Irji'i. What is this alif? Permanent or full? Full mouth. And remember this ra sakin, this ra sakin, it goes against the general rule, doesn't it? Because this alif is what? It's temporary. And the next one, ila rabbiki. What is this ra? Permanent or full? Full mouth. Radiyatam. Permanent or full? Mar. Permanent or full? Full, isn't it? What's making this one full? Mardiyah. The ra sakin here. Why is this one full? What's before it? It's a ra sakin. So what we're going to look at? We're going to look at the letter before. Exactly. It's a mim has a fatha. So the ra will be full mouth. Okay. The next example, Azim, I want you to try this one if you can. Yeah. So yadhunnuna billahi. You want to try it? It's a second to last line on the right side. Yadhunnuna billahi. Just try after that. غي حقي. Yeah, so ra has a fatha, yeah. غير الحق. Try read after me, Azim. غير الحق. So this ra fatha, let me ask you, Azim, is this full or empty? Full mouth, exactly, because the ra has a fatha. Let's say, for example, I wanted to stop on this ra. Let's just say I wanted to stop and I said غير. Would the ra be full or empty? Empty, because ya sakin, isn't it? Ya sakin. The next example, فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ. فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ. What is this ra sakin? Full or empty? Okay, anyone think full? Both right. If you remember, this is in this one, both of them are right. You can read it full and you can read it empty. Because why? Normally, because there's a qaf, which is a full mouth letter, the ra should be full, but because the qaf has a kasra only in this place in the Quran, nowhere else. Only in this place in the Quran, because of the qaf has a kasra, the ra you can read empty as well. So you can say فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ, or you can say فِرْقٍ, whatever is easy. For me, I find it easier to read it empty mouth. فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ. You understand? So this one you can read both ways. The next one, very easy, Aghasab. Inna Allah Ghafurun. So ra full or empty? Full mouth. And Inna Jahannama kanat mirsada. So this ra full or empty? Who thinks empty? Why do you think it's empty, uncle? What's after the ra sakin? Saad, isn't it? So the Saad full mouth letter, imagine this, okay? The Saad full mouth letter, it's making the Ra also full mouth. Do you understand? So this Ra, mir, it won't be mir, sada, So these are all examples of Ra mutaharrik, Ra mushaddad, Ra mawkufa, and Ra sakin. Now, next slide, inshallah, I want to finish off with this very simple rule, the sifat of qalqala. The sifat of qalqala. This is another quality, okay? Another quality which is found in some of the letters. And this is not an opposing quality. This is not an opposing quality. If you remember, the full mouth and the empty mouth letters, these qualities were known as isti'la and istifal. Isti'la and istifal. And these qualities, were they opposing or were they not opposing? Opposing. And what I mean by that is, if they're in one group, then they're not going to be in the other group, okay? They're not going to be in the second group. So if they're full, then they're not going to be empty. If they're empty, they're not going to be full. And that quality was known as isti'la, which refers to the full mouth letters, and istifal, which refers to the empty mouth letters. Now this quality of qalqala, this is not an opposing quality. It's just a quality which is found extra in 5 letters. It's found extra in 5 letters. It's found in 2 heavy letters, and it's found in 3 empty mouth letters. So it's found, there's a combination of them. And what are they? If you look at the board and they're on the paper, the qaf, ta, ba, jim, and dal. Qaf, ta. Everyone say after me. Qaf, ta, ba, jim, dal. So if you notice, qaf and ta, they are heavy letters, yes? And ba, jim, dal, they are smiley letters. But here they've come together. They've come together for this quality of qalqala. Okay? And what does qalqala mean? It means when the sound of the letter, when it has a sukoon, it will be pronounced with an echoing sound. Very easy, very nice rule, very nice quality, and an important quality that we should try and bring whenever we read the Quran. Okay, and you'll understand from the example. In the first word I've got on the board, and you should have it on your papers. Listen to the word. First I'm going to read it without qalqala. And generally when you do read, we actually tend to miss out this rule qalqala. Listen to how it sounds without qalqala. This is how this word sounds without qalqala, yeah? Khalaqna, khalaqna. Okay? Now this is with qalqala. Khalaq, khalaq. Can you hear the echo sound? Khalaq, khalaqna. Everyone say it after me. Khalaqna. I want to hear that echo sound. Really imagine that you're reading the qaf, not with a fatha, but you're reading it with half a fatha, or even a third of a fatha. So, khalaqna. Good, again. Khalaqna. Okay, if you're reading it like this, khalaq, and no sound is coming out. If you're saying khalaq, and no sound comes out, that means you're not doing qalqala. The sound of the qaf needs to come out. Khalaq. Can you hear that sound? Khalaq. It's almost like an echoing sound. So I want you to read it again after me. Khalaqna. Good. This was an example of qaf. An example of ta. Listen to me very carefully. This is without qalqala. Rabat. Rabat. That's without qalqala. But that's wrong. So we want to bring in qalqala. Rabat. Rabat. Can you hear that? Can you hear that echoing sound, uncle? So I want you to say after me, Rabatna. And remember, this ra is a full or empty? Full. Ra is a fatha. But the ba is a full or empty? Empty. Ba is going to be empty, remember. So we don't want to say Rabat. Make sure you smile for the ba. Rabat. Rabat. Let's just try and concentrate on this part, okay? Rabat. Again, make the ba smiley. Rabat. Rabat. Good. So again, now when we say the whole word, Rabatna. The trick is read the word slowly. Really understand and follow each letter. Rabat. And picture your mouth moving to it. Rabat. If you don't picture it and you just read it, it's going to come out rabat, which is wrong. We don't want to read the ba full. We're going to read the ba smiley. Rabatna. Make that echo sound. Imagine the ta has a third of one fatha. Rabatna. Okay, really practice that echoing sound on the ta. The next one is nice and simple. This is without qalqala. Sub. Listen to me, and even if you look at my lips as well. Sub. No sound is coming out. Sub. I don't want to read it like this. I want to read it like this. Sub. Can you hear the qalqala? Sub. I'm literally echoing out the sound. So everyone say it after me. Subhana. Again, subhana. Excellent. And the next one, al-fajr. This jim, we want to read it with qalqala. If we read it without, it's al-fajr. Fajr. So we want to read it with qalqala. Al-fajr. Fajr. Yeah. This was the example of jim. And the last one, without qalqala, it's ruqud. Ruqud. You can almost hear. You can almost not hear the dal. We want to read it ruqud. Everyone say after me. Ruqud. Good. Excellent. Ruqud. So you understood the qalqala. What qalqala does to these 5 letters when they have a sukoon, it makes it echo. It makes it echo. And another way of understanding it, just imagine you're reading the fatha. Yeah, so you're reading these letters with 1/3 of a fatha. And an easy way to remember all 5 of these letters is if you remember this one word, it's not on your papers, it's on the board. If you remember this one word, qutbujad. Qutbujad. You have the qa, ta, ba, jim and dal, all in one word, isn't it? Qutbujad. Everyone say it with me, qutbujad. Okay, so if you remember this word, then you remember the 5 letters of qalqala. And on the next well, I've got these 2 surahs. There's no time to go through it now, but these 2 surahs, Tabbat Yada and Qul Huwallahu Ahad. On your papers as well, all of the qalqala are highlighted in what color? On your papers, it's all highlighted in red. So I really want you, inshallah, all to go through. I'm sorry that we couldn't go through it. I need to go through it. Allahu Ad. Don't say Ahad. If you just say Ahad, you're not doing qalqala. It needs to be Ahad. Allahu Samad. Lam yalid. Wa lam yulad. Wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Okay, that echoing sound. Really practice this, inshallah, and go through all these rules. And hopefully, for next time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a tawfiq. Ameen. And jazakumullah for taking bath. Subhanallah.